Hello, friends, campers, Kaijumen. Welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk. Tonight is very special. We are kicking off our season 2, if you will. Joining me is full-time co-host Matt Levine. Matt, send me a request if you can do that. Cool. And then we'll get started talking about The Return of Godzilla, 1984. One minuto, por favor. Aha!
Hey, Vincent.
Hey, Matt.
How's it going?
Oh, good. So I'm just going to do that little bit of intro again real quick. Okay, so here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk. Tonight we are presenting our breakdown on The Return of Godzilla, the good, the bad, and the downright campy. Joining me for this new series is Matt Levine, co-host on Camp Kaiju. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you. Are you as excited as I am?
I am extremely excited. Kicking off a new year of Camp Kaiju, talking about some great monster movies, particularly with, one of the better Godzilla movies that I've personally seen. So could not be more excited, yeah.
All right. I'm thrilled to hear more about that. Not to give too much away right now. I think I have a different take based on just what you just said just now.
It's possible, yeah.
But that's all right. That's what is so great about talking about monster movies. So let's just get into the movie itself a little bit, and then we will again go into our personal breakdowns, the good, the bad, and the campy, and just have some fun. All right. So The Return of Godzilla, 1984. After a fishing boat is attacked, the sole surviving crew members realize, well, there's one crew member who's left alive. That's right. And he realizes it is none other than a resurrected Godzilla. However, efforts to bring the story to light are suppressed by the Japanese government amid growing political tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, who are both willing to bomb Japan to stop the monster. Did I capture the essence of the film there?
Yeah, that's the movie in a nutshell, for sure. There's a lot more to talk about there. I wasn't really sure exactly what the plot was going to be structured like. And I will say kind of right off the bat that, I love the original Godzilla. I've seen a couple of the sort of Showa era sequels or sort of kaiju movies, appropriately so. But I'm definitely not an expert. So I did kind of come to this like a little bit fresh, not knowing what to expect exactly. And yeah, I think the plot's really surprising. I think some of the ideas underneath the plot, are more interesting and complicated than I thought they would be. And I think that synopsis kind of indicates that a little bit.
Yeah, I was trying to take a note from you actually and not have the synopsises be so long-winded. So that's just that was my attempt at that.
Great. Yeah, it's a good, concise synopsis.
I took it from Letterboxd, so I can't take full credit. Anyways, the movie is directed by Koji Hashimoto, who was the assistant director on several of those Showa-era films that you mentioned. So like King Kong versus Godzilla, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, so some more of like the 60s type of Godzilla, which is very different in tone from the 1954 Godzilla, which this is the sequel to, which is what Return of Godzilla is, the direct sequel to. So definitely a man behind the camera who knows a little bit of what he's doing in terms of a Godzilla movie, a Godzilla story, which I found interesting. So yeah, do you know much about the Return of Godzilla, like its context, like where it was coming from in Toho's movie history or whatnot?
A little bit, in doing research for this conversation, I learned a little bit about it. And like I said, I have not seen a lot of those Showa era Godzilla movies that Toho released. But, I know that they were kind of dwindling in terms of popularity and box office sales. They kind of were progressively doing worse and worse throughout the late 60s, throughout the 70s. So yeah, I know that with the Return of Godzilla, they were going to try to go back to like the darker roots of the original Godzilla, which is such a powerful allegory for nuclear destruction, because Godzilla, of course, is born of radiation as a result of the atomic bombs dropped by the United States. So yeah, I didn't really expect that the Return of Godzilla would be so kind of. It's both dark and campy at the same time, but I think its political undercurrent is trying to get at some of that Cold War era unease about like nuclear destruction could be waiting right around the corner at any moment. So, I think it's admirable that Toho kind of went back to that direction in an effort to sort of bring back some prestige. And they were trying to bring like adults back to the movie theaters and get some box office sales. But I think the way that they did that was in a really kind of clever and sophisticated way.
Yeah, I think so too. Have you seen the last movie of the Showa era, Terror of Mechagodzilla?
I have not. No.
It's personally one of my favorites, although it is to date the lowest grossing Godzilla movie of all time, which I think is a shame because it's actually really has a serious tone in and of itself. But by that point, the franchise was beyond salvation. So yeah, they just scrapped it, the whole thing until this movie.
Yeah, and I think I like I said, I do have to watch a lot more of those movies, but I'm sure that they're maybe great and fun in their own way, like but not in like sort of a way where it's like we want to make like a metaphor for being alive at these times or to sort of like talk about what's going on politically at the time. From what I've read, it's a little more cartoonish, like monster battles and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I do also appreciate that the Return of Godzilla is going in, a slightly more complex, but also, like I said, at the same time, kind of campy and fun direction.
Yeah, so that's kind of why I was excited to bring this movie to the table, because it is one of the few solo outings with Godzilla. There's no other kaiju in the movie. And trust me, we'll get to those because if you're not watching a true Godzilla movie if you're not getting the full breadth of experience. Yeah. And this period, the Heisei period, of which Return is the first in the series, the tone is more realistic. They do a good job of grounding themes and designs in a more naturalistic way. And I think the Heisei series has a lot to offer. And I haven't talked about that series yet on Camp Kaiju. So I was also really excited to just be like, yeah, let's do something we haven't done before. I wanted to talk about the context of this movie in terms of where Japan was in the 1980s. Did you come across any research any findings in your research or not?
In sort of a broad way, just in terms of the booming economy of Japan at the time, fully like a major player on the capitalist worldwide scale. A process that had started like right in the post-war era. Like I think they called it the post-war miracle or the post-war boom, where
Yeah.
decade, they were a major player when, like you would think that the war would have been very destructive, and of course it was in many ways, but the speed at which they were able to kind of rebound and sort of take part in this like growing global economy. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that it's kind of one of the big sort of defining characteristics politically and socially of Japan in the 20th century. So I know that process was just continuing throughout, the 1980s. And of course, this movie was made in 1984. I think, we definitely see that in The Return of Godzilla. I think, these skylines and these skyscrapers and even like the bustling trains and subways and everything, even though at the same time we do see like these rural fishing communities which seem like totally removed from everything else. It's a pretty fascinating depiction. And I'm guessing you were about to touch on this as well, but I also think that its portrayal of Japan sort of being stuck between the United States and the Soviet Union in this Cold War era, says a lot about like where the world was at in sort of fun, unexpected ways.
Yeah. So yeah, I came across that miracle term myself, and I thought that that is exactly my picture of Japan in the 80s. Like even in American movies, Japan is like involved, like in Die Hard. You know what I mean? And it's just Japan. Like you have Nintendo and Atari, and then or not Atari, but certainly Nintendo and car manufacturing. Japan is like the number one car maker in the world. And in terms of trivia, you touched on this too. The Godzilla suit in this movie had to be resized upwards to take into account the growth of the Tokyo skyline from the 1950s.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a fascinating piece of trivia. Like, it just like speaks to like the scope of the 20th century. Like everything was growing in size and like wealth and sort of just like becoming larger than life.
Yeah.
Um, I love the sort of like model sets in this movie for a lot of reasons, but that's one of them for sure. It's sort of like is a very implicit and clever way to denote that a little bit.
Yeah. And then the nuclear. So what was interesting about this movie, what I like a lot, was their attempt to ground it back into the anti-nuclear message from the 1954 version. But you think like, okay, the anti-nuclear message is still a universal theme, if you will. But the context is different. In 1954, the context was the atomic bomb being dropped on Japanese cities. In 1984, the context is, oh, we have two superpowers with nuclear weapons. We don't have any, but we have to sort of placate both sides. And we're like, Japan is portrayed in this middle of this tug of war,
Mhm.
which I found really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does kind of refer to that history a little bit when the prime minister in the film says, he's speaking to envoys from the United States and the Soviet Union. And he says, your countries have not been victimized by this in the past, like we have. So we can't so readily, bomb our own cities. We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a really great scene, like a really fascinating scene. And one of the most formally striking parts of the entire movie, and this is a little bit like, I'm going to nerd out about like film technique here a little bit, but like during that scene,
Please.
there are like two diopter shots, and diopter shots are really, really awesome, where one part of the screen, there's a certain depth of field, and then the other part of the screen, there's like a deeper depth of field, and you have kind of this fuzzy vertical area in between them. So we see that with the Japanese prime minister, kind of like a close-up of the back of his head, and we see the American envoy on one side of the screen, and then there's a similar shot, again using a diopter, and like kind of the inverse of that, where this time the Japanese prime minister is on this side of the screen, and we see the envoy kind of like further back on the other side. It's a small thing, but my mind was blown by that moment. It's for like such a on the surface campy movie. That's like an extremely clever and very stylish way to depict the political tensions that were going on at the time.
That's really cool. I love that. I don't pick up on that stuff. I hope to now. but I will say I did notice the camera work was this sort of dramatic technique. I just didn't have the language to call it what it was. What's it called again?
Diopter?
A diopter.
Yeah, Diopter.
Very cool.
Such a striking technique. Brian De Palma used it all the time. It's really, really great. But to kind of speak to what you were saying about before with like the different contexts of the 1980s as opposed to the 1950s, I think the original Godzilla implicitly was very critical of the United States, obviously. It couldn't really, the film never really just outright, calls America, warmongers or anything. Like the dropping of the bombs is what, gave birth to Godzilla. So he kind of symbolizes the destruction that countries are capable of, in particular the United States. But in The Return of Godzilla, in a way, America is kind of the good guys. Like it's actually the Soviets who accidentally launched a Soviet missile. And it is an accident. Like the one of the, the Soviet envoy tries to stop it and he can't do it in time. So then the Americans say, okay, we'll like blow up this nuke in space so that it doesn't actually, touch down in Tokyo. I just think that's so fascinating that like, implicitly in the early 50s, America was the bad guy. And now perhaps because Japan was this sort of diplomatic capitalist player, it sort of had to be a little bit more gracious about that,
Yeah, certainly. Before we go any further, I have to ask, I mean, I'm sure you watched the same version that I did, right?
Yeah, I did watch The Return of Godzilla and not Godzilla 1985.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, right. Which I would have been surprised if you had, because I didn't realize Godzilla 1985 is not available on DVD. So you would have to have an old VHS copy.
Sadly, I did not. I really want to see that movie, but yeah, and that also has Raymond Burr, right? Who was in kind of like the weird American spin-off of the original Godzilla back in the 50s. So there's some weird parallels there.
Yeah, no, it's a weird, mind-blowing thing that, so you had Godzilla, Gojira in 1954. Then in 1956, you had an American recut, if you will, of that. And in that American recut, they insert Raymond Burr's character into the movie. History just repeated itself in 1984. Toho didn't make a lot of money on this movie, actually. So they sold the distribution, the foreign distribution rights back to Hollywood. And they once again recut it and put Raymond Burr back in it, which I actually think is a stroke of genius on their part.
Yeah. It's like a nod to film history, and like a way that maybe a relatively small number of film nerds will get, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, you think Godzilla's nerdy today? At least I would say most people have heard of Godzilla.
Yeah.
In 1985, when Americans saw The Return of Godzilla, I mean, the pool of Godzilla fans must have been extremely niche.
Yeah.
But there were a few who were like, "That's Raymond Burr. That's for me."
Yeah, I'm dying to find a VHS copy of Godzilla 1985, which I'm guessing is like really expensive on eBay somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it yet.
I don't know, but the reputation of that movie is just silly. Like Dr. Pepper had a huge product sponsorship deal in the movie, so apparently like there's Dr. Pepper everywhere.
Hopefully that'll be the feature of a Camp Kaiju Instagram live session sometime soon.
That would be amazing. I'm going to pull a great segue here. Since we're talking about sponsorships, I need to tell you about our sponsor. Yes, Camp Kaiju has an official sponsor for season 2, banditsemporium.com. They sell t-shirts. They are the official t-shirt partner of Camp Kaiju. You can go to banditsemporium.com or hit their link in our bio. They have soft shirts, they have colorful shirts, they have long sleeve shirts, which, it's kind of cold out right now, so a long sleeve shirt could be nice. But whatever you choose, you can use Camp Kaiju, those two words put together, as a promo code to get 10% off your next purchase, Matt. So I think that's what you need to do after this chat.
That is absolutely what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out in this balmy 2-degree weather and have a good time. Yeah.
Well, 2 degrees, you're going to need multiple long sleeve t-shirts then.
Yeah. But I can use the great 10% off deal. It's perfect.
All right, I'll just wrap it up because I'm contractually obligated to say that, hey, whatever your style, banditsemporium.com has you covered. As they say, we sell shirts. Camp Kaiju doesn't sell shirts, but proceeds go to support this podcast. So, check them out.
Please do.
Thanks, guys. So is there anything else we want to cover about context, about the movie history, or anything like that before we get into our breakdown of the nitty-gritty?
Well, perhaps this would be included in the nitty-gritty. I don't know if it would be, but so I'm sorry if I'm kind of jumping the gun here a little bit. But my main takeaway from this movie, like, just this period of model set man in a rubber suit special effects. I love it. I prefer it so much to just like nonstop CGI. We're now like 20 years into like the CGI era. Like everything kind of looks the same, you know.
Mm.
Any Marvel movie, like the last hour is going to be like at like only CGI explosions, and it's like, why do I care about this?
Yeah.
I would much rather see a guy in a big suit falling into like a artificially constructed building, like the little trees that we see, like the little like model trains and cars that we see on the streets. It's beautiful in its own way, and it looks like weird and visceral and like tactile in a way that CGI can never be. So I just wanted to throw that in there because that is honestly one of my favorite things about the Return of Godzilla, which is good because like the last half an hour or so is just like Godzilla's rampage, and it looks so. Yeah, CGI is the worst thing to ever happen to movies. Is basically.
Well, you heard it here, folks. I don't disagree with you. I think there are examples. There are enough examples of good CGI, like convincing, like if you stop motion or motion capture suits and that sort of thing, mm-hmm. that makes 99% of CGI just look like trash.
Yeah. It's a good point. I'm being slightly facetious. Like, Lord of the Rings has great CGI. I like Doom last year had really great CGI, I thought. But in terms of like monster movies, I love, I mean, like, you can't beat this style, I think, where it just looks so cool and so painstakingly created. I love it.
That's one of my, that's a highlight on my list too. The miniature work on this is one of the best, some of the best I've seen in a Godzilla movie, or a giant monster movie. It does have like a weird sense to it. Like it's tactile, like you can tell it's the size of a toy, but your mind still is willing to suspend its disbelief. I think the model work looks really good. I think Godzilla's costume, like the suit, looks really good too. Like his face is mean. He's got like a snarl.
Yeah.
He looks ugly. Like he's been punched in the face a bunch of times.
Yeah, totally. Godzilla snarl was a note that I jotted down several times while watching this movie. It's fantastic.
And the animatronics in the mouth.
Yeah. It's so good. Like it's not convincing per se, but it's like like it is kind of more convincing. Like if there was a universe where this creature could exist, maybe it would look like that,
Yeah. There is another creature actually, lest we forget the sea lice from the beginning.
Yeah.
So I gotta say, I loved the beginning a lot, so much. It was like ghostly. There were like rotting corpses aboard the ship. It was a ghost ship. It was dark and definitely tapped into the horror roots of the 1954 version.
I love that. I was not expecting that. It reminded me quite a bit of The Fog, the John Carpenter movie.
Yeah.
Where they first go onto the ghost ship towards the beginning of that movie, just like a perfect horror scene, like so atmospheric and like all the fog, appropriately rolling in. So yeah, this scene in The Return of Godzilla reminded me of that. And it's a cool, unexpected dose of just like creature horror when I sort of expected like giant monsters right away. Love that scene. Totally agree with you.
Yeah. I also thought The Fog. Awesome. We're on the same page. I loved, I call it, I don't know, the Jaws technique where the monster isn't revealed until like halfway through the movie. And I thought this film did that really effectively with Godzilla. And then when you first see him, it's a POV shot of Godzilla going through the fog. I love that. That was also like, oh my God, what are we watching right now?
Yeah, totally. That's so cool. And then I think shortly after that, not the first time, but like there's a character who works at a nuclear power plant who suddenly like turns around and Godzilla is like right next to him. And I don't know how you wouldn't like hear him coming, but it's like such a great moment. Like he turns around and this like toenail that's like the size of a human being is right next to him. And the rest of the creature. It's such a cool reveal. It's great.
Yeah, it was a really good reveal. So I thought the movie started very strong. Um, Also, yeah, I just gotta say, like portraying Godzilla as more animalistic and instinctual, I thought they came up with a clever way to, like, the human characters came up with a clever way to trap Godzilla because he's attracted to the radio signals from this homing device or whatever. And I hadn't seen that before, and I thought that was just a unique idea.
Yeah, I agree, especially if Godzilla is kind of meant to represent, as one character sort of alludes to in this movie, like like the chaos of the natural world or whatever, like the violence that animals are capable of. Yeah, I think it's a really good way to manifest that, and I think it makes the ending surprisingly like kind of touching, And I
Mm.
want to give away for people that haven't seen the movie, but um, yeah, you generate you like feel some sympathy for something that you didn't think that you were going to be all that like affected by. So it's pretty impressive in that way.
That's great, man. I love that you loved it. That's great. Well, maybe you didn't love it. We haven't gotten to our ending yet,
Yeah.
but I'm glad that you liked it at least.
I definitely did. Yeah, like way more. Like I knew I was going to be entertained by it, but yeah, I liked it more than I thought I would, and I was, it's a more complex movie than maybe some people give it credit for.
I agree. Awesome. So, what didn't work for you?
Well, I had to watch the version that was dubbed into English. Subtitles were not an option, and that's not the movie's fault per se, but it does kind of reveal some of the campiness or the limitations of the film. The performances are not great, but are also sort of irrelevant. That's not really why you see a Godzilla movie, so I'm able to give that a pass. Some of the dialogue, which again is kind of not done any favors by the dubbing into English, but it can be a little blunt and on the nose, like when the reporter Maki asks the biologist, the professor character, are you studying Godzilla because he killed your parents 3 years ago? That's like one of the first lines that he says to this new character, like this character that he's meeting for the first time. So it does not handle exposition very gracefully, and like the performances and the dialogue are fine. They're not like meant to be super deep or realistic or anything, but I think that's all made up for by other ways that the movie kind of conveys its ideas through the plot, through Godzilla, obviously, through some of the political tensions that were happening in the real world, which audiences obviously knew of at the time. So I don't think those weaknesses in performance or dialogue are really that serious of an issue.
Yeah, I think I think I took greater. I don't know. I was not. Uh, what? How do I? Trying to find the right word, to convey what I want to say. I hate the word boring. I think that's a cheap word and it's a lazy word. But I was not stoked. My fires were not stoked when Godzilla was not on this screen. It's not the movie's fault. Well, it is. It's not the franchise's fault because it's not like what you come to the movie to see. I think I've seen enough exceptions to that, however, where I'm like, oh man, actors, you got to give me something more.
Yeah, no, you're right, and the romantic subplot, which just does nothing at all. Like that's not engaging. It's not emotionally involving at all. So I agree with you there. I kind of suffered through the non-Godzilla parts. And even, we were talking before about like the scenes of the Japanese prime minister and the American and the Soviet envoys and all that. It is really interesting, but it also does make the movie drag a little bit. There's like a middle period that does start to get a little bit long, I think.
Yeah, I thought the same thing with those political scenes, which are often noted as the standouts of the movie. Yes, however, um, they they weren't as compelling as they maybe could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the performances. Um, so yeah, the Godzilla. I like Godzilla. I love Godzilla. Anytime he's on screen, I just and again, I'm coming from it because I've seen almost every other Godzilla movie. So this one, Godzilla's action scenes for me um, felt a little mediocre. Like he just kind of ambled around. If I don't know. Godzilla like kind of took a nap at one point.
Yeah, because he was like hit by the cadmium bullets, right? That was like the explanation that the movie had. Yeah, he doesn't seem like all that ferocious. I know we were talking about his like animalism before, but yeah, you're right. He sort of just like stumbles around. But I do think that like that nap that he takes against that building that he crashes into, and then suddenly he's woken up in a pretty awesome moment when like the nuclear missile like explodes in outer space, and then like the electromagnetic lightning like wakes him up in Tokyo. Really, really great moment. So then there's this close up of like his eyes sort of just like blinking awake or whatever. It's moments like that where I'm like, all right, this is the Godzilla that I thought I was going to get in this movie,
That's great. Yeah, and I agree. The movie had a lot of like really great moments that I just felt weren't as cohesively compelling as they could have been. I don't know.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's but I think it's like it's exciting moments. It's kind of like its highlights kind of make up for its deficiencies, I would say.
Yeah, true. One moment that made me laugh, and this is kind of my campy note, were the submarine crew in the beginning. The submarine gets destroyed by Godzilla. A great moment of tension, actually. Like that's what I mean. Like the movie started so strong for me. And then about halfway through, I was like, I feel like it's running out of steam. Maybe I was coming off a long day at work. I don't know. But there was something about the movie that just kind of fell into a lull after that beginning. But the Submariners all sound.
I'm sorry you cut out there for a moment. I did not hear what you just said. I apologize.
That's okay. Their Russian accents were charmingly heightened, exaggerated.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And again, like I don't know if that's that might not be like the original filmmaker's fault, but sort of like I guess I don't know a lot about this, but I believe there was another crew that like prepared it for international release or American release that might have post-dubbed it. So, but yeah, you're right. Like whoever's fault it was, they were definitely like comical, villainous, mustache twirling sort of Russian.
Yeah. But that was my campiness. I loved it.
Yeah.
I kind of went out a little bit. That was my battery. So, yeah, we can find our way to an ending here. But I want to hear what you found really campy about this movie.
Well, I think it is sort of like I alluded to kind of in the performances and the dialogue. Again, that moment where the reporter is just like, "Oh, are you studying Godzilla because he killed your parents?" Like, moments like that. That's like not how any human being would talk to another human being. So, it's it's campy. It's a little ridiculous, but very entertaining. There's also there's a drunken character who sort of like takes advantage of like Tokyo being evacuated to like eat a fancy meal at a really nice restaurant. And then he sort of like helps out the two protagonists, but then they also sort of just like mock him and suddenly he's not in the movie anymore. So it's campy and it's also maybe in questionable taste. It's like trying to be comic relief, but I just don't think it comes off all that well. So sort of a weird moment there. I loved it. Yeah, the sea lice is great. Like, it's actually a really great suspenseful scene. But I think like the actual monster is very clearly like just like a rubber thing that a guy is like pretending to take off his chest or whatever. Yeah, exactly. But it's camp in the best way, where we realize how ridiculous it is, and yet it's like skillfully done at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's what this movie kind of shows. It's like, yes, it's campy at its heart, but it's also in its soul a very serious movie. So yeah, my final estimation of the film, and it's because I've seen so many other Godzilla movies, I think this movie is historically significant. It marks the beginning of a whole new chapter of Godzilla films, which I actually want to maybe feature on here again soon. But ultimately, it didn't quite stand the test of time for me. If somebody was like, "Hey, what Godzilla movie should I watch?" I've never seen a Godzilla movie. I wouldn't give them this one.
Mm-hmm.
This is like advanced Godzilla movies. This is beyond the 101 course.
Wow. I'm definitely not an expert in Godzilla, and I still enjoyed it. But maybe that's because I like didn't know what to expect. So I think there maybe could be good or bad things about coming to this movie as a Godzilla neophyte, if you will.
Yeah, and obviously you really enjoyed it, and I love that. And you made me rethink a couple things. So yeah, maybe next time I will enjoy it as much as you. We should just watch it together.
Yes, please. Perhaps the VHS Godzilla 1985 version.
Okay, yeah, that's the natural progression here.
It's got to happen. Yeah.
Okay, people, Kaiju campers, buy some T-shirts, and we'll save up enough money to buy the VHS, and then we'll have a watch party. How about that?
Ooh, I love that idea.
Okay, Matt. Anything else before we get out of here?
The opening and closing credits are awesome. I won't say why exactly, but I love them so much. Okay, I'll go into a little detail. I know we're almost out of time. The opening credits have an exploding volcano, and the closing credits have an awesome original song. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Oh man, that volcano scene. Did you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Again.
Okay. This is all right. I'll edit this out and post for the pod. I'm glad you found the volcano scene touching. If you liked that, I would recommend Rodan from 1956. It's the saddest monster movie I've ever seen.
Wow, that is a bold claim and really a selling point for me. I have to check it out. Say that I love monster movies, I love horror, science fiction, but for whatever reason I never really got into kaiju and Rodan and Godzilla and this type of movie. So I'm very, very happy that you're giving me an excuse to do so.
Perfect. Oh, before we leave, what are we watching next? That's very important for people to keep coming back to this show.
Yes, yeah, self-promotion. In 2 weeks at the same time, 9 p.m., we're going to be talking about Mimic by Guillermo del Toro. A really fascinating director. He's kind of risen to like the heights of Hollywood acclaim. Nightmare Alley, of course, just came out pretty recently. Mimic was a very kind of troubled production. It's basically a monster cockroach movie. Really excited to talk about the ways that movie is kind of a failure in some ways, but a very, very interesting failure. So join us for that in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's going to be a really good conversation because I just watched it and I feel like I have a lot of good things to say.
It's unfairly, I think because of its production issues, it's kind of unfairly maligned, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I can't wait to talk about that.
For sure. Okay, Matt, I'm excited. Thank you for being with us, and we'll talk offline. But thank you, everybody, for hanging out, and join us next time for Mimic from Guillermo del Toro. Until then, stay campy.